Bien, bonjour, bonjour à tout le monde. J'espère que la petite pause a fait du bien.
Elle était là tantôt. Oui, ça a regardé.
Donc, j'espère que c'est ça, que vous avez repris un café pour la suite. Je me présente, mon nom est Marie-Josée Naud. Je suis conseillère en équité, diversité, inclusion au niveau du vice-rectorat à la recherche à l'Université Laval. Et pour cette session-ci, avec les 4 panélistes invités, on va parler de l'expérience des institutions qui ont fait partie du programme Pilote Dimension. Donc, avec nous aujourd'hui, en personne, Geneviève Lapointe de l'Université Laval et en ligne, Hyacinth Simpson de Toronto Metropolitan University, Malinda Smith de University of Calgary et Hina Mistry de Wilfrid Laurier University. Donc, à chacune de ces personnes-là, on a posé quelques questions auxquelles elles vont répondre un peu dans l'ordre qui vient. Ça va être vraiment, chaque personne va répondre un peu à toutes les questions, chacun à son tour, et les questions vont venir après, les questions du public, dans le fond. Donc, au début, peut-être les 4 panélistes se présentent présentent leur rôle au sein de l'équipe Dimension dans leur institution. Ensuite, une autre question, ça serait qu'est-ce qui a amené la participation de votre institution au programme Pilote de Dimension? Quelles ont été les forces motrices et les circonstances, le contexte local qui a motivé cette participation? Aussi, elles vont répondre à la question quels ont été les défis auxquels l'institution a été confrontée à tous les stades, autant au début de la mise en place que pendant la mise en place du projet pilote. Comment la participation de l'institution au programme Pilote Dimension aura bénéficié à chacune des 4 institutions. Et finalement, bien, ça serait intéressant d'entendre nos panélistes sur comment l'institution a géré l'année de transition qui a suivi la fin du programme, qui était un peu, comme on a entendu plus tôt, sans éclat. Comment cette incertitude qu'il y a eu au début a affecté les efforts en EDI, comment les différentes équipes et les institutions ont réussi à maintenir l'élan qui avait été créé par la participation au programme. Donc, on va commencer avec notre panéliste qui est présente ici sur place. Donc, j'inviterai Geneviève Lapointe de l'Université Laval à venir au micro.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hi everyone. The presentation will be in French, so feel free to use the Wordly for translation. Mon nom est Geneviève Lapointe. Je suis conseillère en équité, diversité et inclusion à l'Université Laval. Et sincèrement, c'est vraiment une joie immense d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. Plaisir, c'est pas un gros mot. Je suis vraiment contente parce que Dimension, pour nous, comme je vais vous le présenter, ça a été une expérience extraordinaire qui nous a vraiment motivés, qui a rassemblé les forces vives de l'EDI à l'Université Laval. Donc, c'est vraiment agréable d'être avec vous pour vous en parler puis discuter pour la suite des choses. Donc, la première question étant pourquoi notre institution a participé à l'Université Laval? Qu'est-ce qui nous a amené, disons, à participer à Dimension, au programme pilote? D'abord, il faut dire qu'en 2019, la rectrice de l'Université Laval, Sophie Damour, était la présidente de l'Université Canada. Et à l'époque, on commençait de plus en plus à parler d'EDI. Il y avait entre autres eu toutes les décisions qui ont été prises autour des chaires de recherche du Canada et on passait d'une obligation de moyens à une obligation de résultats. Il faut dire qu'à l'Université Laval, on était en sous-représentation pour nos groupes en quête d'équité au niveau des chaires de recherche. Donc, il fallait faire un plan d'action. Il y avait tout ça qui se passait là, au niveau de l'EDI. Donc, c'est vraiment avec enthousiasme que l'Université Laval a décidé de participer au programme. D'une part, il y avait un engouement au niveau de... On réalise vraiment qu'il y a un manque de diversité. Là. Clairement, on n'allait pas avoir de chaires si on ne faisait pas un effort de recrutement. Mais au-delà de cette représentation-là quantitative, il y avait aussi l'idée très ambitieuse de vouloir changer la culture organisationnelle de l'université, d'avoir une culture plus inclusive, et ce, à tous les niveaux, autant de la recherche, de l'enseignement, du personnel administratif et de la communauté étudiante. Donc, on a fait un appel pour être membre du programme pilote. Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est qu'on a été la seule université francophone québécoise à être retenue parmi les 17 institutions l'institution. Donc, tout le contexte pan-canadien était vraiment enrichissant pour nous, là, étant les seuls du Québec. Quel a été mon rôle au sein de l'institution? Au début, il faut dire que, on parlait tout à l'heure de ressources, de dire oui, c'est beau s'engager, mais il faut quand même qu'il y ait des gens pour porter le projet. Il faut qu'on investisse des ressources humaines, des ressources financières. Donc, moi, j'ai été engagée en 2019, en octobre 2019 à l'Université Laval, et tout de suite, en rentrant, on m'a dit un de tes premiers mandats, ça va être de coordonner le programme Dimension, former l'équipe d'auto-évaluation, puis finalement être un peu la répondante du programme pour l'institution. Heureusement, Marie-Josée Naud est venue me rejoindre dans l'équipe d'auto-évaluation puis dans le programme, surtout pour le côté recherche. Moi, il faut dire que j'étais plus du côté institutionnel. Et on avait également plusieurs membres dans l'équipe, dont des professeurs, Kamel Bégi, Sophie Brière, des personnes étudiantes, Sylvia Damani, Fabienne Anti. Il y avait François Gélineau qui représentait la haute direction. Au départ, c'était Lynn Bouchard et il y a eu un changement là, de direction au fur et à mesure que le programme avançait. Il y avait Carole Martinez au niveau du personnel administratif, Sylvie Marianne également, Sylvie Marianne Ruguinda et Erika Barancourt qui représentait aussi les personnes étudiantes. Ça, c'est l'équipe de base, mais on était une vingtaine de personnes là, à travailler de manière régulière pour faire partir le projet. Donc, c'est important d'avoir une représentation. Un de mes mandats, c'est que l'équipe d'auto-évaluation soit vraiment diversifiée au niveau des différents secteurs représentés, communauté étudiante, professeurs, recherche et enseignement, ainsi que le personnel administratif. Et également qu'il y ait une diversité de représentation des groupes en quête d'équité. Je vous parlerai plus tard de ça, ça a été un de nos défis. Puis juste pour vous rappeler, l'Université Laval, c'est quand même une grosse institution. Là, on parle de 57 000 étudiants, 17 facultés, 60 départements, écoles et instituts. Il y a 500 millions en fonds de recherche, 4 chaires d'excellence, plus de 300 centres, chaires, instituts et autres regroupements. Fait que c'est sûr que quand on parle d'EDI dans une institution de cette grosseur, bien, ça prend plusieurs personnes. Il faut vraiment faut qu'il y ait un soutien de la haute institution, de la haute direction, ce qu'on a eu. Mais en même temps, il faut aussi qu'il y ait tout le monde sur le terrain là, qui travaille ensemble. Donc, voilà un peu pour mon rôle qui était de coordonner tout ça et de s'assurer que ce soit équitable dans la représentation des secteurs et qu'il y ait différentes personnes de différents groupes. Une autre question qu'on m'a demandé, c'est les défis. Et ça, je dois vous dire, on a eu de nombreux défis. Une des beautés du programme, c'était qu'on nous amenait justement à réfléchir sur nos défis, quels sont les freins, les obstacles, comment mettre sur pied un tel programme dans une si grosse institution. Je ne sais pas si les autres institutions vont en parler, mais quelque chose qui est vraiment arrivé, là, tout le monde le sait, en 2020, on a eu la pandémie de COVID-19. C'est sûr que ça, sérieusement, ça l'a vraiment mis un frein. Le personnel était essoufflé. C'était de tout se remettre à distance. Tout le monde l'a vécu. Fait que quand on doit se remettre à la base, quelle est la mission de l'université, mettre l'accent là-dessus, juste continuer l'enseignement, la recherche, bien, il y a comme eu un peu un mot d'ordre de, bien là, c'est les programmes, tout ce qui est EDI et tout, il faut vraiment mettre l'accent sur juste que l'université continue à fonctionner. Fait que ça a fait aussi en sorte, puis ça, les recherches ont démontré que les personnes membres des groupes en quête d'équité, ce sont aussi ces personnes-là, souvent, qui ont été le plus touchées par la pandémie, la charge de travail, tout ce qui entoure ça. Fait qu'il y a eu un petit ralentissement, mais je pense que c'est quand même assez généralisé. Ensuite, un autre défi, c'est qu'on a remarqué rapidement qu'il y avait une sursollicitation de certaines personnes. Donc, les personnes qui lèvent la main pour faire le DI, ça se trouve souvent à être les mêmes personnes. Même dans une grande institution comme l'Université Laval, on voyait qu'on faisait souvent appel aux mêmes personnes expertes, que c'était souvent les mêmes personnes membres du personnel qui s'impliquaient. Donc, c'était vraiment important d'aller diversifier, d'aller chercher d'autres personnes. Ensuite, il y avait l'enjeu de dire, ben oui, on fait le programme Dimension, mais est-ce qu'on met les ressources humaines nécessaires pour le faire? Est-ce qu'on a une allocation de ressources suffisantes? Ce qui a été intéressant, c'est que, après que la pandémie, ça continue, mais on a quand même réussi à s'ajuster, à s'adapter. Il y a vraiment eu un engagement là, de la haute direction de dire, on va réserver du temps pour les membres du personnel pour s'impliquer dans Dimension. Parce que l'idée, c'est qu'on ne veut pas faire le DI de manière bénévole. On veut que ça soit inclus dans notre travail, dans notre charge de travail. Fait que toutes les personnes qui participaient à l'équipe de Dimension, puis ceux qui travaillaient dans le programme Dimension, avaient du temps de travail alloué spécifiquement pour ça. Donc, ça a été un défi qui a quand même été relevé, mais c'est important à penser à tout ça. Ensuite, Un autre défi qu'on a eu, qui est vraiment particulier au Québec, mais peut-être à d'autres institutions aussi, c'est toutes les contraintes légales qui entourent la collecte de données. Nathalie, tout à l'heure, parlait de l'importance d'avoir des données quantitatives, des données probantes. Bien, nous, c'est sûr qu'on est encadré par le programme d'accès à l'égalité en emploi où on peut se poser certaines questions au niveau de l'auto-identification, mais par contre, on ne peut pas poser toutes ces questions qu'on veut. Par exemple, des questions sur la diversité sexuelle et de genre. Ça ne peut pas être posé à toutes les personnes qui appliqueraient à l'Université Laval, par exemple, pour avoir un portrait là, de notre diversité au niveau de la diversité sexuelle et de genre. De plus, on n'a pas de données sur notre communauté étudiante très spécifiques au-delà des questions du registraire, mais on n'aurait pas de données sur la diversité sexuelle et de genre non plus, ni sur l'appartenance ou non à des groupes racisés. On a peut-être le pays d'origine, le statut de civil, je veux dire, de citoyenneté, immigration, résidence permanente et tout, étudiants étrangers, mais on n'a pas étudiants internationaux, pardon, mais on n'a pas nécessairement le détail comme on voulait. Fait que nous, on a un défi de collecte de données. Donc, ce qui fait qu'avoir une grande collecte au niveau organisationnel, pour l'instant, c'est pas possible. Fait que comment on a contourné ça, c'est de dire, bon, on le transforme en projet de recherche. Puis, ce qui est bien, c'est que c'est un projet de recherche qui a été subventionné, qui est approuvé par l'université, puis on va pouvoir aller chercher des données. Mais ça, c'est sûr que ça a été un casse-tête de ne pas pouvoir demander toutes les questions qu'on veut parce qu'il faut se dire, les données, c'est important pour avoir un portrait vraiment diversifié de notre institution. Une autre chose qu'on a réalisée, c'est le fait d'avoir pas tant de diversité au niveau de l'université, ou du moins que les gens n'osent pas toujours s'auto-identifier comme appartenant à certains groupes. Bien, nous, ça sonne un petit peu l'alarme, si on veut, de dire, bien, est-ce qu'on a vraiment un climat inclusif? Est-ce que les gens ne s'identifient pas parce qu'elles ne se sentent pas, ils n'ont pas vraiment le goût de dire à quel groupe elles appartiennent, c'est quoi les raisons? Et dans le cadre de notre projet de recherche, on va aussi faire un sondage sur le climat en matière de DI pour voir comment les gens se sentent à l'université, s'ils se sentent inclus ou non au sein de la communauté universitaire. Donc, le fait qu'on n'ait pas tant de diversité fait en sorte aussi qu'on n'a pas comme une masse critique de personnes qui veulent s'engager nécessairement tout le temps et ça cause aussi de la sursollicitation. Donc, pour toutes ces raisons-là, ben, on a un projet de recherche qui va s'activer. Puis Dimension nous a permis un peu de vraiment cerner toutes ces lacunes. Fait que, ce qui m'amène un peu à l'impact là, de notre participation à Dimension. Ben, c'est sûr que pour nous, Dimension, ce qui était extraordinaire, c'est qu'on a vraiment eu la permission, si on veut, on a été encouragés à faire un examen extrêmement honnête, humble et lucide de notre situation. Fait que Dimension, ce qu'il nous disait, c'était regarder ce qui se passe en EDI, c'est quoi vos lacunes. Donc, on n'était pas en train d'essayer de se vendre et de dire, on veut absolument une médaille. C'était plus comme, OK, qu'est-ce qui se passe? Fait que rapidement, pour vous donner des exemples, on se disait, bien, on a beaucoup de choses qui se passent au niveau des premiers peuples. Il y a le Cercle des premiers peuples, il y a le Bureau des premiers peuples, il y a des ressources qui ont été engagées au niveau de ce groupe. Ça avance bien. On se disait, pour les femmes, il y a quand même eu beaucoup de progrès. On regardait, mais encore là, quand on parle femmes, il faut bien dire que c'est surtout des femmes blanches et pas nécessairement racisées ou en situation de handicap ou des femmes autochtones. Donc ça, c'est un groupe, mais même là, si on regarde au niveau des profs titulaires, c'est à peu près 30% qui sont des femmes. Fait que c'est pas égal partout. Fait que là, ça nous permet d'être vraiment honnête. On a réalisé, on a beaucoup de services, par exemple, pour les personnes étudiantes en situation de handicap. Il y a un centre d'aide aux étudiants, mais on n'a pas la même chose pour les personnes employées. On n'a pas une stratégie bien définie en matière d'accessibilité, en matière de situation de handicap pour les membres du personnel. Même chose, on n'a pas de stratégie antiraciste. C'est le fait que Dimension soit vraiment un programme qui touche aux 5 groupes en même temps, puis c'est ça, 5 groupes en quête d'équité, bien, ça faisait vraiment en sorte de nous pousser et de regarder, de ne pas oublier nos angles morts. Donc ça a été vraiment positif, c'est-à-dire où doit-on mettre des efforts puis où ça va bien. Ensuite de ça, bien, on avait une équipe extraordinaire, merci à l'équipe de Dimension. On avait une cohorte extraordinaire, ce qui fait que cette Dimension nous a permis d'avoir une communauté de pratique nationale. Je suis trop enthousiaste quand je parle de Dimension. Puis, ben, qui nous aidait à rédiger un plan d'action, puis à réfléchir, ben oui, qui est imputable de chacune des actions? Est-ce que c'est réaliste? Est-ce que c'est non? Est-ce que ce ne l'est pas? Comment pouvez-vous prioriser vos données? Fait qu'il y avait vos actions, pardon. Il y avait tout ce concept d'échange et de co-construction le guide, on y a pensé tout ensemble avec les universités, puis nous, on s'est dit, on est dans un processus de collaboration, d'échange, de co-construction par pour et avec les institutions, par pour et avec les groupes en quête d'équité. On n'est pas en compétition, on ne veut pas des médailles. On veut savoir où on est par rapport à notre cheminement vers un campus, une communauté plus inclusive. Puis l'Université Laval, on a eu le niveau 2 en passant. Donc, là, il faut que je me dépêche pour aller dans mes autres questions. Comment on a géré l'année de transition? Sachant que Dimension n'a pas été financée, on a été super tristes, puis on voulait se rouler en boule dans nos lits puis plus rien faire. Donc, c'est pas prêt. On a fait, bon, c'est pas grave. Au moins, l'avantage de Dimension, c'est qu'on a réussi à avoir un budget récurrent associé à l'EDI. On a fait passer notre plan d'action à la haute direction. Il a été approuvé, fait que le travail continue, mais clairement, c'est sûr que c'était difficile de savoir que ça ne continuait pas dans le sens où notre communauté de pratique qui était animée par l'équipe de Dimension n'était plus là. Tous les conseils, tu sais, faire un plan EDI institutionnel, c'est pas évident, là. Fait que pouvoir échanger avec des gens, pour avoir une équipe d'experts, d'expertes, là, avec Nathalie, Karine, Nathan qui nous soutient, c'est vraiment extraordinaire. On avait même Athéna Swan, la Grande-Bretagne, qui nous a aussi parlé beaucoup de plans d'action, de qu'est-ce qu'ils ont vécu quand ils les ont mis en place. Fait que ça, c'est sûr que ça nous a déçus énormément. Mais en même temps, Dimension nous a permis d'être comme un levier pour mettre en place ce qu'on veut, fait qu'on continue quand même le travail. Donc, tu sais, en gros, on a notre politique EDI qui a été adoptée, il y a des modalités qui ont été mises en place pour faire vivre cette politique-là. Il y a plusieurs formations obligatoires quelques-unes formations obligatoires sur l'EDI à l'université. On est de plus en plus invités dans les cours pour parler de comment avoir des plans de cours inclusifs, des curriculums inclusifs. Il y a des recherches attitrées à l'EDI, des ressources en RH au niveau institutionnel, en recherche attitrée à l'EDI. Fait que le fait, en fait, ce qui s'est passé, c'est qu'on a institutionnalisé l'EDI, dans le fond, à l'université. Puis le programme Dimension, il faut se le dire, ça a été un levier très important pour y arriver puis pour nous soutenir. Donc, on continue quand même et on participerait à nouveau avec plaisir à un tel programme. Merci beaucoup.
Merci Geneviève. So I'll now invite our dear colleague from University of Calgary, Melinda Smith, to join us, open her camera and... No? Okay. Maybe later. Okay, so it would now be the time for Toronto Metropolitan University to address us. So Hyacinth Simpson, can you please open your microphone and camera? We would love to hear about TMU's journey through the...
Okay, all right. First of all, thank you very much for having me. Can everybody hear me? Can I just see a thumbs up? Okay, great. Thank you for having me today and for having this panel. I think it's important because having this opportunity to share with the gathering a little bit about dimensions at Toronto Metropolitan University. It's a very opportune moment right now because this panel centers the importance of storytelling, of firsthand witnessing to what the benefits of dimensions are at the local area level in each institution, whether it's an academic or a research institution, and what it means for us nationally as post-secondary institutions. So I think this is a moment, an important reminder, an acknowledgement of how important it is to have a formal structure at the national level for this program. For Dimensions is a program that consistently centers and supports the importance of EDI, of fostering inclusive excellence across our academic and research institutions, and the importance of Dimensions in providing a network that helps us to grow the work that we're doing, the work in EDI, in SRC, in our local areas. And it helps to hold us accountable, not only to ourselves as individual institutions, but to the larger post-secondary network. It's also timely have a panel like this and to have an event like this one that is centering Dimensions, because it's an opportunity for the cohort institutions and all of us here to seize the moment and not only affirm the existence and the importance of the Dimensions program to Canada's future of innovation, discovery, and research application, but to also strengthen dimensions and to rethink how we can best position dimensions or dimensions 2.0 so that it can better serve the needs of our institutions in the coming years. It's also an opportunity, I think, especially in a climate that is increasingly hostile to any mention at all of EDI, of the importance of diversity, of inclusion, of making sure that other forms of knowledge, other epistemologies, other ways of knowing inform how we live, how we look at the world, how we approach problem solving. The climate is getting increasingly hostile. And so it's an opportunity, this event, and also the storytelling that the members of the panel are doing this morning, how important it is for us to bear witness to the importance of dimensions as a program and of EDI in research. So let me take this moment to just mention a little bit why I think it's important to educate the public as well, because I don't think a lot of people understand the economic, the social, as well as the reputational importance of centering EDI in research and in our research ecosystem, how much we all benefit. And I think this is a moment for us in talking about dimensions and what it means for individual institutions, to also talk about how important it is to make sure that the public is educated, is made aware of the significance of the importance of the dimensions mandate. I hope you don't mind me doing this, but I want to take a moment to just tell the gathering a little bit about what happened last week. A group of us, some members of the cohort institution and other, allies, met together very quickly for an hour last week, Thursday, because we were thinking about, because we're in the process of doing this, we're thinking about strategies that we can explore over the spring and summer months to strengthen, to reaffirm that the Dimensions program exists, regardless of alarmist, communications to the contrary, talk about the plug has been pulled on Dimensions, that there is no funding for Dimensions at the federal level, that institutions, individual institutions, cohort institutions, and others are panicking. Regardless of that, to understand that Dimensions as a program still exists for many reasons, and we can talk about why that is in the question and answer session, to reaffirm and to strengthen Dimensions, to think about what Dimensions 2.0 can look like, and also to figure out what we can do to make sure that the larger public, members of the public, as I was saying before, understand why we need to make this kind of program permanent at the national level. So there are 5 questions that we were given as members of the panel, and we have about 15 minutes to talk, so I don't want to take up too much of the time. So I'm going to very quickly run through the 5 questions and then take about a minute and a half, 2 minutes to respond to each. It will be a little bit more organic, so I won't be taking one question at a time. There will be overlaps in how I respond to the question. So the first question is, how did participation of your institution in the pilot come about? What were the driving forces, the circumstances, the local context? The second question is, what was your role within the Dimensions SAT team at your institution? What challenges did you face at all stages to get things up and going for the pilot? The fourth question is, what did your participation in the pilot bring to your institution and to you as an EDI practitioner? And the final one is, how did your institution navigate the uncertain transition year, which is 2023 to 2024, after the end of the pilot? What has it done, not done, or undone to EDI in your institution, considering that we have a certain degree of uncertainty around the future of the Dimensions program at the national level? So just briefly, how did the participation of your institution in the pilot come about? I won't go into the long story about the fact that, and it's a really important piece of the information about the history of the Dimensions program, modeled after Athena Swan, that one of our colleagues at TMU was among the many luminaries, I will call them, who were actively involved in charting dimensions to meet the specific requirements of the Canadian research context. So I'll just talk about very briefly the fact that it was in 2019 that TMU became a signatory to the Dimensions Charter. And TMU were selected as one of the 17 cohort post-secondary institutions to participate in the pilot, which technically ran 2019 to the spring of, or the winter of 2023, or around 2022, fall of 2022, when we all submitted our applications. And I want to just quote a little bit from the president of my institution, who signed off on our application for recognition at the construction stage when TMU submitted our application to National Dimensions in October of 2022. Quoting him, by endorsing the charter, TMU reiterated its deep commitment to embedding equity, diversity, and inclusion principles in all our policies, practices, action plans, and culture. And then he mentioned our EDI action plan. TMU has an EDI action plan which predated the Dimensions cohort, called Leading Through Diversity. At the time, our strategic action plan or strategic research plan, which is just coming to an end, and we are writing a new strategic research plan for 2023 to 2028, which coincides with the construction phase of the Dimensions recognition. So, he mentioned that Leading Through Diversity EDI action plan that TMU has, and our strategic research plan, making sure to mention that both of these plans reflect these core values of TMU, which form the basis of our commitment to going beyond minimum EDI compliance requirements. So it's not just us saying Dimensions is at TMU, but we have other documents that complement that predated, were developed and refined alongside Dimensions at TMU during the pilot, and which are now being integrated with, and the Dimensions action plan being integrated with them, being integrated with the focus that Dimensions now has at TMU, and that we will be taking forward from 2023 to 2028. I will say, for those of you who saw the University Affairs article, I think it was 26th of February, saying, I think the title was "The Plug Has Been Pulled on Dimensions." And yes?
Yeah, sorry. If you could wrap up, and I know it's all very passionate when you all talk about it, but we need to go to the next person. So if you can wrap up in 1 minute or two.
Okay, yes. You saw that article, and 2 people were quoted. Melinda was quoted, 3 people, I can't remember the third, but Melinda was quoted for sure. And also the VP Research and Innovation at our institution was also quoted. And his comments made it very, very clear that regardless of what is happening with Dimensions at the national level, that TMU is fully committed to following through on the mandate of Dimensions. In 30 seconds, what I want to say is that in the Q&A period, that I would like to field the question about the specific structure of Dimensions at TMU, because it's a very unique structure that I think has served us well because of the unique history around EDI at our institution. So I'd like to take a question on that. And I would also like to take a question on what the transition period, 2023 to 2024, as we transition from pilot to permanence at TMU, what are some of the challenges and what vision we have for cementing EDI in research at our institution. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Hyacinth. I'll invite now our colleague Hina Misri from Wilfrid Laurier University to open her microphone and camera so that she can share the journey of her institution with us. Je parle anglais. Hina, I'll tell you when there's a few minutes left for you to wrap up.
Sounds great, thank you. Bonjour tout le monde et merci pour venir et écouter aujourd'hui. Je vais parler en anglais aujourd'hui. So first, I just wanted to talk about how our participation in the of Wilfrid Laurier University and the pilot came about, and what were some of the driving forces and circumstances, and a little bit about our local context. So EDI leads at Laurier have been involved in the Dimensions pilot program since the drafting of the Dimensions Charter. One of our faculty members, Professor Shohini Ghosh, who is currently the NSERC Chair for Women in Science and Engineering, and also the founding director for the Center of Women in Science, helped to establish the Dimensions Charter. In 2019, when the then Federal Minister of Science and Sport, Kirsty Duncan, announced at Laurier that there would be the $5.3 million in federal funding for 15 institutions to take part in Dimensions. The funding that we received as part of the Dimensions pilot program helped to establish the Office of the Associate Vice President, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, which is where I work currently. So at that point in January 2020 is when we had Dr. Barrington Walker joined Laurier as Senior Advisor, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, a role that was then elevated to an Associate Vice President, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion role. And then our team itself was built out later that year. So Laurier had a strong team of EDI leads prior to the establishment of the Office of the AVP EDI and the Dimensions program as well. And that includes my colleagues at the Center for Student Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. My colleagues Lauren Burrows, Humaira Javed, Dr. Eden Hennessy, and other EDI leads who worked at the institution prior to my arrival, such as Dr. Laura May Lindo, had championed EDI in student-facing work in the research ecosystem. So this is particularly, and just generally in the post-secondary sector. So things like the Being Race report, the Eraser Summit report, like all those things all spoke to EDI in the post-secondary sector and were led by Laurier prior to Dimensions. So I will say, like, there's a good foundation of work that Dimensions at Laurier built on. But the funding from Dimensions and the establishment of the Office of the AVP EDI did help to bring equity, diversity, and inclusion into leadership spaces in the university in a systematic way. I would say that's probably the biggest impact that, like, Dimensions, the availability of funding, like, through it as well, that it helped to achieve. So after the establishment of the Office of the AVP EDI, which again was facilitated by the Dimensions program, there was a regular and formalized role in an advisory capacity, but still in the Office of the Provost and Vice President Academic, which served as an EDI lead in academics-related matters, and then later into, like, I would say to some degree in research as well. In terms of circumstances that impacted the work of the Associate Vice President and just Dimensions program as a whole at this particular moment that it was rolled out, there were a few important ones. So first was obviously the racial reckoning that took place in the summer of 2020 following the murder of George Floyd, which, you know, across the sector we saw, like, accelerated many universities to reflect on the dire underrepresentation and marginalization of Black academic staff and students in Canada and around the globe, I would say. And of course, as has, you know, my co-panelists have spoken to already, the COVID-19 pandemic. We all experienced the pandemic, but this experience was uneven, including in the university context. We were working in a situation where everyone had much less capacity due to having to keep up with constant changes in the pandemic, changing caregiving responsibilities, other responsibilities, health-related matters, etc. So we personally found that, like, Laurier community members from equity-deserving groups had a lot less capacity to support additional service commitments, which included participation in the Dimensions pilot program. So, like, in this particular moment that it was rolled out, it was unusual, and people were, and, you know, it was very taxing, and so people were very tired, and that impacted, I think, the potential of the Dimensions pilot program. But regardless, it still, you know, achieved a lot. So in terms of a bit about my role and my team's role in the Dimensions SAT at our institution. So My role in Laurier's Dimensions team changed a bit over time. So I joined Laurier in the fall of 2020. By that point, we had a Dimensions pilot program coordinator, Rebecca Smythe, who worked with the Associate Vice President EDI to strike up a self-assessment team. And Rebecca Smythe also represented Laurier at the Dimensions cohort meetings. Rebecca also, began the drafting and institutional scan drafting the institutional scan and action plan, coordinating the various initiatives that would be part of carrying out Dimensions at Laurier. And this included all work involved with developing and establishing Laurier's first student demographic survey. That was probably the biggest project at Laurier that came out of Dimensions. So I should also say that Dimensions at Laurier overlapped with a separate but related strategic planning exercise, the aim of which was to develop, through consultation with the entire university community, with a particular focus on members of equity-deserving groups, a strategic plan for equity, diversity, and inclusion. So this was an adjacent exercise to Dimensions, which is still in some ways funded and supported by it. So I supported Dimensions-related work and work associated with the strategic planning process on both sides. So in the last few months of the program, I was responsible for finalizing Laurier's institutional scan and action plan from assessments provided by our institutional self-assessment team, the student subcommittees that were part of our self-assessment team, and from the adjacent strategic planning exercise. And I also helped carry out some of the programs and initiatives that were outlined in our action plan. So we did kickstart actually implementing the items that were in our action plan. And these included things such as the development of training and programming that provided practical strategies on how to embed EDI and anti-oppression lenses into the research process and in the classroom. And it also included the development of courses on EDI and research assessment, and just generally programming that helped to facilitate a cultural shift on campus by building EDI literacy among the whole campus community. And so now I support the AVP EDI in operationalizing the different EDI strategic commitments through the coordination of units that were responsibilized as leads for action items in both, three different plans: the Dimensions Action Plan, our EDI strategic plan, and then Scarborough Charter items as well. So I'm just going to briefly speak a little bit about challenges that we faced at all stages in trying to get things going during the pilot. So in addition to COVID-related challenges that I outlined earlier, other challenges included a lack of resourcing to support the compensation of self-assessment team, our institutional self-assessment team, which was comprised of faculty, staff, and then we had a student subcommittee, which consisted of students, most of which were partnered in our student equity, we're sort of drawn from our student equity center that does student-facing work. And also it involved, I guess, in some ways, the strategic planning committee that facilitated the strategic planning exercise. In an ideal situation, there would have been more funding available, either for stipend salaries or course releases. Instead, we relied on staff with EDI mandates in their role. There were also EDI and women's faculty colleagues, which are dedicated EDI positions in Laurier's faculty union, and then other faculty members who are sort of doing this work uncompensated. So I would say that was sort of what made it really challenging is and made it kind of taxing on people as well. Another challenge, which was related to COVID, was just stakeholder engagement. Our team did the best that it could given the circumstances of an online environment, but I'm sure others found this too. It's challenging undertaking engagement with stakeholders in the university community, especially those from equity deserving groups, and solely an online format, which is the safest format for things to take place and at the time of the pilot. So just another challenge that we had to deal with. So I'll just end by talking a little bit about what our participation in the pilot brought to Laurier, and to just us as EDI practitioners at Laurier. So I would say that the most important things that Laurier's participation in the pilot brought were, one, the ability to be part of a nationwide community of practice advancing EDI, and two, the ability to have an external body or council of experts who could hold leaders at our institution accountable for developing EDI strategy that was sound, and more importantly, rooted in expertise and grounded in evidence and data, and also for implementing that EDI strategy. So although the strategic planning exercise at Laurier was adjacent to the Dimensions Scan and Action Plan, it worked to build in those accountability mechanisms internally. So I think that's why, like, my previous manager had done those, like, a dimension. We didn't just rely on dimensions to get EDI done. Like, we also had our shared, like, EDI strategic plan as well. So there were internal mechanisms for also building accountability. So again, this EDI strategic plan was developed through consultation with Laurier's own unique university community. It was approved within the university's own governance structures. So it was approved by Senate and board. And the reason for why this was the case was that it protected any progress that was made within the institution from things like changes in priority that arise from election cycles and changes in government. That being said, though, the cohort, like, where dimensions was really helpful in this process was, one, the cohort meetings allowed us to build EDI strategy that fit the particular local context of our institution, while at the same time providing a regular forum to workshop ideas to ensure that we were apprised of the best practices and innovations from across the country from our peers in EDI units, nationally. The cohort meetings also allowed us to view in real time, like, what was possible at other institutions so that we could push the boundary at ours, and point to others who were already adopting certain strategies and doing certain initiatives. And this helped our institution's EDI team address, our, like, colleagues' concerns around, like, risk and effectiveness, because we could point to, okay, this is also being done here. We can take this leap. So I thought that was particularly helpful about the cohort and the Dimensions pilot program as a whole. The review process was also immensely helpful because it allowed our leaders to be held accountable to a team of EDI experts outside of those who were already within the institution. And this allowed for self-reflection and engagement on the part of university leaders to speak honestly about their progress towards EDI commitments. So just some final comments about how did our institution navigate the uncertain transition year after the end of the pilot. So in the year after the pilot, we worked to implement the Dimensions Action Plan and adjacent overlapping strategic commitments, such as I labeled them before, Laurier's Strategic Plan for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Dimensions Action Plan at Laurier, and then the Scarborough Charter recommendations as well. So these were three significant lasting impacts of, there were three significant lasting impacts of the Dimensions pilot program at Laurier. One, first, the Dimensions participation allowed Laurier to lay the foundations of developing an EDI data strategy, starting with the development of the university's first student demographic survey. So our self-assessment team chose to prioritize the survey to develop an accurate picture of Laurier's student community, and this work continues today through the establishment of the EDI Data Advisory Committee at Laurier, which is developing governance protocols for EDI data, liaising with stewards of EDI data on campus and beyond the campus, and advising other units at the university on EDI-related matters as it pertains to the collection and use of EDI data. If you'd like to know more about that, I would highly recommend reaching out to my colleague, Dr. Eden Hennessy, because she is in that role as EDI data specialist. Second, Laurier completed its first institution-wide strategic planning exercise as a result of Dimensions, which consisted of a climate survey and the development of an action plan that responded to the needs and concerns of members of equity-deserving groups at our institution. And then third, over the course of the pilot, Laurier established the Office of the Associate Vice President, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, an office that consisted, immediately of 2 permanent staff members, 1 contract staff member. But the AVP EDI office led the work of Laurier's SAT, as well as other initiatives that supplemented and expanded on, like, these initiatives. And so this work that was being done by our office included things like the development of online courses, resources, workshops, and public lectures, a cohort hiring initiative for Black and Indigenous scholars, a Laurier Legacy Project, which is like a project that looked at the legacy of our namesake and our institutional history, etc. So there were many other additional projects that came out of the establishment of this office, which again was, like, kickstarted by Dimensions. So I was glad that we had adjacent strategic plans and that we didn't rely solely on the momentum of Dimensions. We are working through the implementation of Dimensions, but it's difficult because it's sort of sunsetting, I guess. Also it eliminates one more body of accountability that we could have leaned on in trying to move things forward in our institution. I definitely miss the cohort meetings, and I would benefit from the opportunity to strategize with my peers across the country on how to facilitate the implementation stage of our action plans, which is where we are now. And so with that, I will say thank you.
Thank you so much, Hina. That was very interesting. Thanks for you applauding here. There's technical issues that are preventing our colleague Melinda Smith from joining us, unfortunately. So we'll try to connect with her later today so that she can share the experience of University of Calgary with us. But in the meantime, we'll use the extra time to circle back to Hyacinth, who have cut short because we were short in time then. But now we have a bit more time. So Hyacinth, if you'd like to come back and share about the transition year and what happened at TMU since the program finished and how you're maintaining the momentum.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Marie-Josée. I just say that the very unique structure that Dimensions took at TMU was based in the fact that we had a lot going on at TMU prior to the Dimensions pilot. We were the first institution in Canada to have an VP of equity and community engagement. We have a vast network, and I'm not just saying this to pat ourselves on the back, but I'm saying, we've conducted an environmental scan to see what kind of work has been going on, not only in SRC, but EDI in other areas in the university as well. And we figured that what Dimensions gave our university was, it wasn't something new. It wasn't another layer of EDI work, but Dimensions gave us at TMU a scaffolding for us to pull together all of the work that's going on across the institution and then figure out how we can coordinate that work to better serve our researchers, our scholars, and our creatives. So that has been a benefit coming out of it. A challenge of that has been, trying to let people see that we are not coming in as Dimensions to take away the work or to not, highlight the sweat and the energy and the years of service that people have put into doing EDI work at TMU, but that the more we work together, the more we share resources, the better and more effective our outcomes will be. For me, as an EDI practitioner, I'm a faculty member, and I am the interim Dimensions director, because at TMU, the way it was structured was that we had a Dimensions director. We established certain roles for Dimensions. So we had a Dimensions director who kind of oversaw and helped to shape the work of what we call Dimensions faculty leads. So we have 6 faculties, and each faculty has various schools. We have 6 faculties. We have the Yates School of Graduate and Postdoctoral Research, and we have the library. And each of those areas has a Dimensions faculty lead who is either a tenured faculty member or a senior librarian. And what that means is at TMU, Dimensions was focused on, bringing the work, bringing the training, bringing the awareness raising, bringing the capacity building. How do you do EDI in research? What are the gaps? Who is being left out? Bringing that work to the local areas, to the faculty, because that's where our constituents reside. And so to hear from them, we had to be close to them. To meet their needs, we had to go through the decanal leaders to make sure that whatever, initiatives are pursued, that they can be translated to the discipline-specific faculty level area, because that's where they will take root and that's where they will have most effect. And so that structure of the Dimensions director reporting directly to the VP Research and Innovation and the DP Equity and Community Inclusion, and then not underneath that, but you understand what I'm saying. Underneath that, the Dimensions faculty leads who then have roots in the faculties, in the library, and in the graduate school to serve all of our constituents, faculty, postdocs, graduate students, undergraduate students, and we've added a new category, our community research partners. So I'll stop there for a moment and allow Mary Jose to come in because I don't want to keep going on. If there's a question for me about elaborating on what's going on at TMU. In the transition here, I'll just add one more thing. It's not a challenge. It has been quite a bit of work, but rewarding work. As the interim Dimensions director, I've been leading this transition. And basically, it has been a huge consultation process. We took the action plan that was part of the application we put in October of 2022. And we decided to make sure that we had the input and the buy-in of every single faculty or the decanal teams, because these are the people who make the decisions. These are the people who, if they drag their feet, nothing happens. So I led a widespread consultation process, which ended only in March. And we have refined our action plan. And our action plan has 7 objectives and 29 actions. And each of those objectives and those actions identify exactly what will be happening at the faculty level over the next 5 years. And who will be responsible for making sure that we measure the success rate of each of these actions and each of these objectives. It has been, for me, exhausting, but an absolutely fantastic experience because given the current climate, we'd think that people would resist, but there is so much appetite among our constituents, so much appetite among the leaders and everybody, that even in a budget crunch, people are saying, how can we do this? So at the end of this month, we will be publishing or self-publishing, so to speak, the action plan so that the entire university community, once again, can have their last say, and say, oh, you've excluded this, you need to refine, objective this or action that. And then we will be bound by that published document for the next 5 years. There's a serious commitment at TMU for that. And we're figuring out right now how to fund the actions over the next 5 years.
Thank you so much. We now have time for a period of question, about 15 minutes. So I don't know if technically we can put all the panelists, the 2 panelists that we have online up there. Geneviève, you can pourrais prendre le micro qui est ici, puis venir t'asseoir sur la scène avec moi. Pour changer, on pourrait commencer s'il y a des questions en ligne pour nos 3 panélistes. Personne? Alors, dans la salle, est-ce qu'il y a quelqu'un qui aurait quelque chose à demander à une ou toutes les panélistes présentes? Oui, Viviana. Il y a un micro juste ici. Ouais, là. So, Viviana is looking for the microphones. Turn around.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's quite interesting. I have a question for our colleague, Hyacinth. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce it well. But, a lot of institutions are changing their name. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the change to Ryerson to Toronto Metropolitan University, because I think it's a really interesting example of what we could do. It was a big change and
yes,
an important one. So maybe we could share that to our colleagues.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that question. Earlier on, I talked about actions that predated TMU's participation in the pilot and also developed alongside our participation, which helped to clarify and center some of the things that we were doing. And, the pandemic, Black Lives Matter protest, the finding of the graves of the students at residential schools, all of that, it was a moment where, of confluence, where all of those things came together and helped to spur the action happening at TMU. And before we changed our name. I mean, it had been quite a number of years with, advocacy on the part of students and faculty that we needed to remove the statue of Egerton Ryerson. We needed to consider how the name of the institution was constantly doing violence to members of the indigenous community every time they had to sign off as Ryerson as their place of work or place of study. And it took the pandemic, it took Black Lives Matter, and it took the finding of the graves to really move things forward. And I think because of that, Dimensions was very well positioned to help the process along. So very briefly, the president instituted what was known as the Standing Strong. I can't use the indigenous term because I can't pronounce it, but the Standing Strong Task Force. And the Standing Strong Task Force spent a couple of years speaking to the community, asking us what we wanted to see, asking indigenous members of our community how we can indigenize TMU. And so one of the recommendations coming out of that consultation process was that we should change the name. We changed our mascot and we changed everything. But beyond that, because, some people would see it's big, it's important, but it's also, if it doesn't go any further, cosmetic. So the work of the Standing Strong Committee, now there were 22 recommendations and we're working through them. And we're working through them alongside the recommendations that came out of the Anti-Black Racism Campus Climate Review, which has resulted in what is now known as the Presidential Implementation Committee for Confronting Anti-Black Racism. So we are focusing on indigenous resurgence and Black flourishing. These are two main areas of work that cut across the academic plan, EDI in research, etc., right? Indigenous resurgence and Black flourishing. And part of indigenous resurgence that connects to the name change and to the work of the Standing Strong is to decolonize TMU. And that also involves decolonizing curriculum. So a lot of work is being done to help us figure out how to make indigenous knowledges central to the courses that we teach. Not only courses taught by indigenous faculty, but how we can indigenize, non-indigenous courses. I'll stop there because I tend to go on. But just to give you a snapshot of what is happening at TMU, when I said, we do have our challenges. We do come up against barriers, but there's a serious commitment. And so my work, I am buoyed up by that because I can always, whenever I encounter an obstacle, I can always fall back on. So these actions, this vision is deeply embedded across TMU. And so we can always come back to that as a starting point if we encounter obstacles.
Thanks a lot. Any question appeared online? No, I think, I'll go with one of mine then to all three of you. We have a dream that I mentioned with the start again in one form or the other. And I was wondering if it did start, how would yourself and your institution partake in its revival and how would you take this forward? What would you do as part of the program? Je vais commencer avec toi, Geneviève.
Est-ce que ça fonctionne? Oui. Thank you so much for the question and thank you everyone for your participation and your presentation of your universities. Merci beaucoup pour les questions, pour la question Marie-Josée puis pour la participation de toutes les universités. Donc la question étant comment on participerait à la dimension, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? Ben, c'est sûr que nous, comme je disais, ce qui a été vraiment, vraiment intéressant, c'est toute la cohorte, la co-construction, le parcours et avec, fait qu'on continuerait dans le même sens que ça, c'est-à-dire avoir une communauté de pratique. On n'a pas toujours le temps de le faire par nous-mêmes, mais lorsque c'est soutenu par un groupe d'expertes externes aux universités qui ne sont pas nécessairement directement dans une institution, c'est vraiment intéressant d'avoir ce regard-là qui est plus détaché. Donc, on participerait vraiment à cœur joie, là, vraiment de manière plus qu'enthousiaste parce que ça a été Sincèrement, c'est un programme qui nous a vraiment amené à prendre en compte nos lacunes puis à avoir un soutien pour le faire. Parce que c'est souvent ça qui est difficile avec l'EDI, c'est de trouver le temps d'avoir les ressources. Et en même temps, c'est une des panélistes qui en a parlé. C'était aussi l'idée que, comme il y a une reconnaissance externe, ben c'est une valorisation pour l'université. Donc, on continuerait à participer comme programme, comme institution participante, mais on pourrait même, je le lance comme ça, pour les institutions qui l'ont déjà fait, pourraient faire du mentorat avec celles qui joignent le programme plus tard. Il y a plusieurs institutions qui auraient aimé participer, qui ne l'ont pas fait. Donc, d'être capable de travailler. C'est vraiment ça la beauté du programme, c'est toute la collaboration. Fait que je pense qu'on pourrait organiser des mentorats avec les institutions qui ont déjà participé, les nouvelles qui viennent. Pas d'autre dire. On veut juste que ça reprenne d'une forme ou d'une autre parce que c'est un programme, en fait, unique qui touchait beaucoup, beaucoup de dimensions d'iniquité. Finalement, 5 groupes, hein, les femmes, les personnes en situation de handicap, les personnes autochtones, les personnes racisées, les personnes de la diversité sexuelle et de genre, et qui est à la fois francophone, anglophone, qui est canadien. On a vraiment rien ici, là, dans le fond, au Canada, comparativement à ce qu'il peut y avoir dans d'autres pays. Fait que je vois pas pourquoi ça reprendrait pas d'une forme ou d'une autre. J'espère que ça répond un peu à la question, là, mais c'est surtout mon enthousiasme qui parle. Mais oui, tout à fait. On aimerait ça, puis on participerait tout à fait avec joie, puis on mettrait le temps qu'il faut pour le faire. Et les ressources.
Merci beaucoup. I don't know if you could hear the translation to what Geneviève was saying, if you had something to add, Hina or Hyacinth?
Yeah, I would like to add something. Yeah, just echoing what Geneviève said, but also what I thought was really effective about Dimensions was that it was just conceived of in a very holistic manner, in the sense of, you were thought to think, you're sort of made to think of your EDI strategic planning and consultation and implementation process like through the lens of cycles, right? So throughout the pilot program, and that's how it was assessed too, right? Like construction means you've gone through one full cycle and now you're starting another one. So it's possible to actually carry that out when the program runs long term, right? Like if you can actually have, the support of the cohort and seeing that cycle through to its end. So, through implementation, through assessing like how effective was the implementation, and then undertaking like your next cycle in the understanding of it, in the understanding that EDI work is never necessarily done. Like there's always forms of oppression we need to be working on, but Dementia sort of facilitated the doing of that work in a very systematic way with your peers, right? With a sort of like, if you've seen the handbook or you downloaded the handbook that was linked in the chat, like a very clear outline of, even if there's, leadership is not necessarily aware of how to do that, it's outlined very clearly for you on how to do it. So I think, like, honestly, it's that really almost like boring practical stuff of what was so useful about it, though.
I'll just quickly say that for Dimensions 2.0 at the national level, I'd like to see, Dimensions, the leadership, insisting that any mention of research, any funding for research, centers, EDI, as important to how that money is spent, how, the research groups to which the money is being directed are going to do their work, that it becomes central to that, and that Dimensions leadership at the national level also make that a very public-facing statement, consistent.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We still got a few, I think a question online. Yeah.
Yes, we do. The question comes from Larissa. How did your institutions safeguard EDI initiatives or ensure the permanence of EDI initiatives so that it wouldn't necessarily be threatened by changes in administration or senior leadership?
So who wants to start with that? Hina?
I can speak a little bit to that, just because, we think, my manager at the time, the AVP EDI, Dr. Walker, he was aware that very much could happen. And so that's why, like, you know, we had dimensions going on and, you know, we filled out the application and everything, but it was very much closely tied to an adjacent strategic planning process that I talked about where, you know, it was like approved by Senate and board. Like, it's a commitment that internally, like, even if there are changes in government, our institution is meant to be making. And I think like that is, it's like how we're sort of planning out implementation or how we're coordinating implementation is, you know, it is that EDI strategic plan, and then what are like the overlapping action items and dimensions and Scarborough Charter as you know, as other like EDI strategic commitments. Like, that's how we're sort of viewing the implementation priorities at this point in time. And I think also having like established, like using the dimensions, like the funding associated to establish like structurally within the institution, like the placement of the AVP EDI, again, like in an academic office, that like that also helped, like the building of structural pieces over the course of the pilot is also sort of how we built in EDI initiatives during the pilot to outlast it, if that was to be the case.
I'll just say quickly that one thing that we've done several things, but one thing is we have created and formalized roles and units at the institution and committed to budget lines over the next several years, at least for these. One example, at the faculty level, we now have quite a number of student success facilitators. In the Faculty of Arts that I belong to, we had, for example, a student success facilitator for Black students. We also have an advisor to the dean for Black education and diasporic studies, and an advisor to the dean for indigenous education, right? So these roles are very important. At the university level, we have, through the Student Success Center, the establishment of what we call the Tri-Mentoring Program, which, you know, has certain programs dedicated to mentoring Black and Indigenous graduate students. And they partner with the Yates School of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies to deliver a lot of these programs. So making sure that the delivery of these programs and the existence of these roles are also networked across the university, so that it becomes very difficult to just, you know, delete somebody's role. Because if you delete somebody's role, it means that we're going to have some kind of lopsidedness here, which is going to affect various other departments and units as well. So I think it's a really good strategy to ensure that one person and that person's politics cannot really upend the whole barrier.
So are these roles assumed by someone that does it full-time, or is it principally...
Yes, full-time.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yes.
Amazing. Geneviève, est-ce que tu as quelque chose à ajouter?
Thank you so much. Very interesting. I'm going to go in the same line. Je vais aller dans le même sens. C'est vraiment une question d'institutionnaliser le DI, finalement. Donc, c'est pas une option. Ça fait partie de la structure de l'institution à travers les politiques, les processus, les pratiques, toutes les activités. Je vous donne un exemple que vous avez peut-être déjà entendu, mais par exemple, pour les bourses des personnes étudiantes à l'Université Laval, il y a maintenant des directives EDI à suivre. Donc, un peu dans toutes les pratiques, on instaure d'avoir une lentille EDI en amont, avant que les choses se fassent. La même chose pour le recrutement. Donc, le fait d'avoir une politique EDI qui encadre tout ça, des modalités, fait en sorte que même s'il y a un changement de direction, c'est déjà écrit, c'est déjà inscrit dans l'ensemble des activités de l'université. Donc, ça ne reste pas au bon vouloir de chaque personne de l'appliquer ou non. On a vraiment un cadre, des règles qui encadrent tout ça. Donc, c'est des changements qui sont structuraux, profonds et pérennes. Donc, c'est vraiment et pour ça, il faut que la haute direction embarque. Mais une fois qu'elle a embarqué, puis que c'est écrit, puis c'est fait, on suit tout ça. Puis ça donne, faut qu'il y ait aussi un budget et des ressources associées à tout ça. Là. Donc, voilà. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Thank you so much. So, merci Geneviève Lapointe de l'Université Laval pour la participation au panel. Thanks so much to Hyacinth Simpson from Toronto Metropolitan University. And okay, yeah, let's take another question from online. Don't leave.
It's not an easy question, so it may be one that we have to discuss over lunch. It comes from Juliette. Various speakers specifically named global and political events as having acted as motor for the institution to instigate changes, such as the pandemic, killing of George Floyd, the discovery of graves in Kamloops. How do you think the encampment and protests happening on various university campuses will influence EDI work going forward?
I'd love to hear our panelists. I'd love to hear our panelists on that, but I don't know. Yeah, so we have officially it's supposed to quickly. Yeah, so can you, if someone wants to take a shot at replying to this really interesting question, maybe in 1 minute?
I'm okay to my co-panelists don't. Yeah, I mean, I think that as was the case with, like these are moments, right, that spark reflection on like what communities know has been happening and how they've been impacted by, local and global systems of oppression. Like with George Floyd, it's a moment that brought attention to something that Black communities knew had been going on for a long time, right? Like the discovery of the graves in Kamloops, like it was a discovery for a lot of settler society, but Indigenous folks who had ancestors, who went to those institutions knew that people were buried there, right? But it's like, these are moments that bring attention to that. Similarly, right, like these, what's happening with the encampments, it's it's things that have been happening for decades, right? Like we know what is going on, but the job of like with EDI offices is like, okay, they're oftentimes like spurred by what community is sort of like bringing to the attention of the institution. And then how as EDI workers do we like work to then change the processes, change how things work to take account of those things. So I think that that is how it has been in the, past few decades and how I would see it sort of panning out in the future. But yeah, that's a great question though. Thank you for asking that.
Oui, merci beaucoup pour la question qui est vraiment intéressante. Puis c'est vraiment bien humblement là, que je vais essayer de répondre à cette question. En fait, oui, on voit que les mouvements sociaux, les choses qui partent de la base, ben, ça nous rappelle que oui, on peut avoir un impact. Justement, ben, c'est terrible. Qu'est-ce qui se passe, tout ça? Le fait que les gens bougent, on se dit, ben, si on fait rien, il n'y a rien qui va se passer. Mais c'est sûr que ça finit par avoir un impact dans les institutions. Puis les mouvements sociaux comme ça, je pense que ça fait une différence. On l'a vu, il y a eu, je n'aimerais pas tout ce qui s'est passé, mais notamment au Québec avec le Joyce Echaquan, ça a eu un impact rapidement. Puis on se rend compte que on ne parle pas juste des choses qui se sont passées dans le passé. Là, c'est encore aujourd'hui les impacts du colonialisme. On les voit tout le temps, partout. Puis pour moi, le DI doit prendre ça en compte. Finalement, il faut être vraiment multidimensionnel puis aller dans les systèmes d'oppression. On parle de colonialisme, de pauvreté, de précarité. Tout ça doit être pris en compte, puis ça permet, je trouve, de garder un œil vraiment de justice sociale. Puis se dire, le DI, c'est pas juste embarquer tout le monde dans une structure qui est inégale au départ, mais c'est de penser à qu'est-ce qu'on fait pour changer la structure ensemble. Voilà, merci.
Hyacinth, did you want to add something?
I'm just thinking, as Hina said, it's really a moment, for reflecting, and reckonings that are happening, I think, are important, and how we handle them as institutions, individual institutions, that is what matters.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks. So that's a wrap. It's time for lunch. Thank you so much to our three panelists, Geneviève Lapointe, Université Laval, Hyacinth Simpson from Toronto Metropolitan University, and Hina Mistry from Wilfrid Laurier. Thanks so much. We hope you'll stay with us later this afternoon for the discussion. Après-midi, on va avoir des ateliers de discussion en ligne et en personne. On espère que vous allez rester avec nous pour continuer cette réflexion. Et puis, donc là, on vous souhaite bon appétit. On revient vers 13h15. Merci beaucoup.